All right. Well, again, my name is Meredith Ader, and my role at Regent is Head of Research and Instruction. And what that means practically for you is that I focus most of my energy on our graduate level students. So when you have research needs, I'm your go-to for most things. We do, though, have liaisons. What a liaison is it's a librarian who has a little extra understanding of particular subjects. So there may be times that I will consult with a liaison, or I may direct you directly to one of the liaison librarians. The point of all this is that we try to share the responsibility of research so that each of you are getting the best assistance possible. Another thing I want to mention is that, in case you are not aware, I work remotely. I actually live in the beautiful western portion of New York State. My husband is a pastor, and so we live where his work is. And at this point in our lives, it is Western New York. I'm originally from North Carolina, so that's where the accent comes from. But the reason I feel like it's important to let you know this is that I imagine most of you are also remote. So there is a wonderful sense of accountability for me in a remote position. I can do my job very easily, which means that I can help you to do your work remotely very easily as well. Oh, got lots of folks coming into the waiting room. Sorry, a little bit of distraction. So again, there's quite a bit of camaraderie when it comes to realizing that we're all doing this from a distance. You are going to encounter moments where you are doing everything right, working with the systems, but something just decides to be mean. I want you to understand that I understand this and that it is something that I might experience once in a while too, but there's always a workaround. Okie dokie. Because this workshop is being recorded, I also have included quite a few URLs. So I don't want you to kill yourself trying to write things down, as fast as you possibly can. Please don't worry about that. You should be able to go back to the recording and capture those URLs and go at it at a normal pace. There is going to be a lot of information today that I'm going to share with you. Some of it may be old news to you, and that's fine. Take a break from your brain, zone out, that's fine. But some of it might be very, very new information. You might want to take notes. Either which way works for you. Do recognize that I'm going to talk an awful lot, and then I'm going to have a big, long pause at the end where you get to ask your questions. We really want this workshop to be practical for you. I understand that in this particular stage of your journey academically, it is very, very easy to be overwhelmed with the amount of information that you are working in. That is very normal, very, very normal. If you feel like you are up to your eyeballs in information, you're doing things right. But there are also lots of ways to keep that information, I call it wrangled, or to keep it under control so that you aren't drowning in it. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen, share my workshop with you. And if I could get somebody to please unmute for just a second and verify that you can see my screen, that'd be great.
Yes, we can see it.
Yes.
Perfect.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Okay, doke. Again, we are recording this workshop. It is going to be available both on our YouTube channel, but also I have a LibGuide specifically for workshops, and both of those URLs are right there for you. Before we get going too far, I want to ask a pretty basic question for you, something for you just to wrap your head around. The question is why? Why are you in the programs that you are in? Why did you decide that this was important to invest? I imagine that for most of you, you have identified some kind of problem in your field, and you've decided that the best way to attack that problem is to get a degree and to study it and to figure out possible solutions. Problem is that once you start looking for solutions, you also begin to open up lots and lots of doors of more information, and it becomes a bit of a juggling act to make sure you are balancing all that you're finding and eventually knowing that you need to put it into something that's coherent, some kind of dissertation or thesis that is going to pass muster, but also makes sense and also addresses a problem that you have discovered. What we're going to do today is you are going to learn how to gather those materials and build something out of them. All that wonderful information that you've been finding, the lit reviews that you've probably already begun to write, the ideas that you're trying to sort, the structure of your writing, all that stuff that you're trying to attempt to lay out. It requires the ability to keep things straight or wrangled in. So today we're going to discuss how to use the library's resources and then also other research tools to help you manage and organize this information in such a way that's effective and efficient specifically for you. We are going to provide some tools and hopefully give you some time to answer some lingering questions, and more importantly, to be reassured that this process is messy. It's supposed to be messy. It's supposed to feel a little organic, maybe even a little bit out of control. But with a little bit of structure, you're going to be able to pull your thoughts together into something that is meaningful, into your dissertation or thesis, something that you're proud of, and something that is approved. So today's workshop areas of focus are going to be boundary lines, tools, and organization systems. So let's start with a few questions. What do I need to discover the boundaries of my research? Can I effectively use the research tools available to me? And what organization system matches my learning style and is going to work for me? I want you to imagine having this big landscape in front of you, where all of the things that fit within your passions are part of that view. All of these things reflect your interests, the general ideas that you brought to Regent in order to pursue a higher degree. But I also want you to imagine fence lines. These fences are designed to pull in only the portion of these ideas that are going to fit into that bite-sized piece of your dissertation or your thesis. What's going to be key is recognizing how those fences get there in the first place. And that requires an open mind. Many of you are pursuing research topics that are interdisciplinary in nature. For instance, if I'm studying how to be an effective Christian leader of high schoolers with mental health diagnoses in schools that have a large percentage of students who are military kids, my research necessarily is going to need to dive into the field of education, Christianity, leadership, mental health, and perhaps even military studies. I'll need to recognize that in my research, each component will need to be studied separately, and then also in conjunction with one or more of the other components. In effect, all of this initial research will help to establish where those fence lines need to be set. The research naturally leads to fine-tuning of this process. Secondly, in this initial search, I should begin to establish lists. I call it thinking like a thesaurus, where it's an exercise where you basically write down every term you can possibly think of that matches any component of your research topic. We call them keywords, and that's just kind of a fancy way of saying what are the words that are associated with my topic. You might hear it listed as search terms. You will be asked You will be asked, what terms are you using to search? There is no wonderful magic way of creating these lists. It really does require lots of brainstorming, lots of reading, lots of intentional grabbing of those words that you see that researchers who have gone before you have used. It's kind of exhausted, and that's okay. You know that you have done enough work when you start to see those same terms over and over and over again. And you will need to do that. You'll need to be able to confirm that you've looked for resources that speak somewhat to your research topic. And that means discovering other words, other phrases, other concepts, theories, things that have been used before. For instance, maybe whenever you're searching this particular subject, the researcher never said high school. Maybe they said secondary education. Or maybe they never used the term military kids. Maybe they said children of soldiers. Whenever we create these lists of terms, or whenever you think like a thesaurus, when your chair asks you what keywords are you using, you can pull that list out and say, well, this is what I'm looking at. And you should have a pretty exhaustive list. Similar is the idea of building lists of concepts. If you're looking at students who have mental health diagnoses, you may find that you need to dig deeper into other concepts related to psychology, for instance. And finally, you'll begin to recognize names. There are certainly experts in your fields of study, and there are authorities that you'll begin to get to know more as you begin to read and read and read and read. And this might be reflective of individuals, but it also might be larger entities such as universities that are deeply involved in some of the research you're hoping to do. It might be for-profit industries with leaders who have important things to say about your topic. And it may also mean investigating government organizations, folks that have authority and funding within your field of study. The idea at this point, though, is to begin to build this collection of lists. So you're looking at terms, you're looking at concepts, and you're looking at people or entities that are considered experts in your field. As a graduate level student, you're in the position of needing to recognize which kinds of resources best address your topic. There are all kinds of resources that hold important information that you'll need to review and potentially include in your writing. And you won't necessarily always be able to rely on peer-reviewed resources. It would be nice. It would be really nice to be told you're only allowed to use peer-reviewed scholarly journals within the last 5 years. And in some cases, that is required. Sometimes that's really, really important. But other times, that might be too narrow of a search. I mean, you are becoming experts. You have the ability to recognize what information is good and what information is questionable. And if it is questionable, then it's up to you to begin to dig deeper and to figure out why this particular person has a point of view that just rubs you the wrong way, for instance. Or why is it that their information is not landing in a peer-reviewed journal? It may very well be that what they have to say is exceptional. It just may not fit within a certain scholarly academic journal. Other resources, though, you might find in business reports. Business reports do not necessarily land in peer-reviewed journal articles, but they are extraordinarily important when we're talking about who is an authority in a field. So looking at business reports may be your go-to. Looking at legislative actions, most certainly. I mean, I don't have to go into too much detail with that. We all live in a country where we see the power of politics. And so looking at what's happening on a governmental level is also going to be something that most likely will affect at least some of your research. And then I have listed on here blogs. What I was trying to do was I was trying to bring it back down to some of the most base forms of information. Blogs are a place for people just to throw out their opinions, throw out their thoughts. It's not necessarily scholarly, but depending on who wrote it, it might be a very good source of information for you. I would say the same thing about podcasts, YouTube channels. I mean, there are so many places that you can find information. The point of today is for you to recognize that when we look at those boundary lines, it's not pre-constructed. This is something that you have to determine for yourself of what fits your particular subject. And then finally, with our boundary lines, let's talk about date restrictions. For many of you, you need to have a historical analysis, and that might be a long history, might be a long history. For others, a historical analysis is 5 years. You do need to make sure that you understand what the expectations are for your field, and then also really consider your topic. Consider what kind of limitations on dates make sense. Sometimes those date restrictions reflect trends that happen over the years. Sometimes they might be a marker in time because of some major event that happened within your subject. And then again, sometimes you really might just want to keep your hands on that most current information. While you're discovering your boundary lines, you also at the same time are beginning to discover that there are tools. There are lots of tools available to you. So 2 questions. Do you know about the tools, and do you know how to effectively use them? We could talk about any one of the tools I have listed here for hours. We really could. Each tool has so much capacity to help a student. Obviously, we don't have that much time, so we're just going to run through them very quickly. Again, you do have access to this recording, and you're going to actually have access to the slide deck as well. So just hang in there. Let's start with finding aids on the far left column. Finding aids are systems developed by libraries, and they were developed in about 2012. That's about the time. Finding aids are kind of like little browsers in the way that they work. They allow you to search all the databases, our catalogs, open access information, open education resources, other libraries, catalogs, and databases. It basically looks everywhere at the same time in the places that we ask it to look. So we're asking, for instance, we use Primo. That's just the name of the company that we use. Primo is looking in all of these places at the same time. In our library systems, other library systems, in the open on the internet looking for open access, but it's helpful to you in that it's keeping you from having to go into one database at a time. As I mentioned, a lot of your subjects are multidisciplinary. If you go into one database at a time, you're going to wear yourself out. We have about 300 of them. But you also don't need just to stick with 1 or 2 that you know well. When you stick with 1 or 2 that you know well, you end up getting really biased information. You really need to recognize that there are lots of different databases out there that are going to address your subject. You just may not necessarily realize that unless you're using a finding aid like Primo, that's going to automatically pull from those different databases. The thing about Primo, though, is because it is looking in so many places, and it is a wonderful starting point. It is a primary searching location. What it cannot do is include newspapers or magazines that come out, on like a weekly basis. When we talk about the sheer amount of information that newspapers and some magazines provide, if we try to include that all in one Primo search, we would crash the system, or we would just completely overwhelm ourselves. So that you will recognize when you're using Primo at the top of the page, there is a newspaper search. And that allows you to look for your information a second time in newspapers, so that it's a separate search. It's still, though, going to be looking in all those places I've mentioned before. Finding aids also have icons. They're just little tools that help to make life a little bit easier on you. Those icons are going to do anything from helping you to build your citation to plunking things into RefWorks or connecting to other resources that are similar in vein. They can even provide a permalink so that if you want to send it to somebody or send it to yourself, you can have that record. Again, we are going to move quickly. Let's talk about databases real quick. Again, we have about 300 at Regent. That does not represent all the databases that exist in the world, but it represents a large portion of them. Some of the databases, they are industry specific. They are going to talk maybe more about divinity, for instance, or more about business, more about education. But some databases also have just unique features. One of our databases is APA PsycInfo. I really like it a lot. And the reason is because it allows me to search by way of methodology. So when you're coming to that point of getting your dissertation pulled together and you're deciding what kind of dissertation you're writing, what kind of research you want to do, you may decide that you want to do, let's just say, a qualitative analysis. And it would be very helpful sometimes to look at other people's writing that was done in that same method. And so APA PsycInfo, as an example, is one database that allows you to do something a little bit unique that the other databases don't. Moving on, guides. We call them guides, research guides, LibGuides. It's all the same thing. Guides also are discipline specific. We build these, and by we, I mean the librarians. We take a lot of the questions that we see our students have and we build guides around them. So for instance, if I'm working with a bunch of education students, I would want to create a guide specifically for education, which I have done. But we also have general guides, things like citation or how to use interlibrary loan or how to use pre-med. These guides are changing all the time, and they are reflective of the conversations we're having with students. So if you have, something that you would love to see as a guide, you certainly can let me know. In fact, I recently just created another guide called Pathways, and that was based on recognizing that we have differentiated learning styles, and Pathways, that guide helps to teach students how to get from point A to point B in our systems, both through a video, but then also through a written script. So anyway, just an example of how our guides are created. You'll notice that you have the librarian listed as a tool, and I do mean that seriously. Each of the librarians at the university, our number one commitment is to make sure our students are being served well. We employ lots of different methods to try to make sure we're available. We can't always, we do sleep sometimes. And so we have a 24/7 chat. If you have not used it yet, definitely recommend it. What the 24/7 chat does is it connects you to a live human being who is a librarian any time of day. So 2 a.m, you're deciding to do some work and you have a question for the library, you can use a chat, and that partner librarian will attempt to answer your question. If they can't do it, then they just send me a note, and then in the morning I'll get back to you. The librarian also can offer one-on-one meetings, and we run residencies as far as providing specific information for your particular department. We're available through emails, calls. We really, really want to be available to you. So if you ever feel like it's a bother or there's just not time, that's not true. You can always reach out to us, and you can reach out to me specifically as the head of research and instruction, that if you would like a one-on-one meeting, please let me know and we'll work out a time. I do have Google listed. Google is not my favorite. It probably will never be my favorite. And the reason I don't love Google is because it's not really meant for scholarly research. Google is meant to sell things. And because of that, it works off of a beautiful algorithm that nobody understands. But what that means, if you use it as a researcher, it's going to start pumping information that it thinks that matches you. That just becomes very, very biased information. Google Scholar does a lot better job as far as providing results that stretches, to all four corners of the universe. But the problem is that it doesn't really care if it's sending you information that has a paywall, or if it's sending you biased information, or if it's sending you just junk, because that's not the reason Google Scholar exists. It exists to make money. And it realizes the more it connects you to information that you have to pay for, then the more Google is doing its job. There are ways to avoid the paywalls. And if you get nothing out of this workshop, but this, hear me well, do not ever, ever pay for access to information. If you find something with a paywall, and you eventually will, send us the title and we will try to find it for you. There's no reason for you to pay for it. The other thing about Google Scholar is you can link Google Scholar to Regent University Library. If any of you have taken UNIV LIB, that's a requirement of the course. And the reason is because we want to make sure that you are going to be connected to information, but you're not going to run into those paywalls. Those are really just kind of obnoxious. Whew. I hope y'all are hanging in there. Like I said, lots of information today. Boolean operators, they have been around for eons. They work beautifully. The primary ones to recognize are and, or, and not. They help to connect words together in such a way that allows your search processes to be more efficient. Same thing with using quotation marks or parentheses, and creating complex search strands. The more you play with the systems, the more you play with using Boolean operators, the more you're going to get results that match what you want. It is very easy to plunk in some words and get overwhelmed with too many results. But small tweaks, small little things that you tell the system, to look for something in such a way that excludes some things that are not appropriate, or includes quotation marks so it sees it as a phrase. Things like that are going to provide results that are far, far better. Any of these tools that I'm talking about might be brand new to you. If that's the case, I would love to have a conversation, and I would love to help you practice using them. Okay, libkey++. Libkey is a system that if you do not have it downloaded onto your computer, I would recommend it. Libkey scours the internet for information that we own. So for instance, if you are in Amazon, for instance, and you see a book that you want to buy, if we own it, a little flame, a little green flame pops up. And that little flame, it's an interactive link. You can actually click it, and it's going to take you directly to Regent University Library to the resource. In other words, you don't need to buy it. It's something that we already have. That also works in almost every other website. One that you may find it useful in is Wikipedia. And when you scooch down to the resource page, all those links, if we own it, again, it'll have a little green flame. You can click it. It'll take you right over to the resource. Great tool. I'm only going to very briefly talk about AI. And the reason I'm going to talk about it briefly is because there are no hard set rules or policies in place about AI yet. Not at Regent, at least. I'm part of the AI task force. And what we are doing this year is we are discussing best use. And we're talking about applications, we're talking about policies. All of that is in the works. And as you already know, AI is a moving target. It's just moving at the speed of light, if not faster. And so this task force is going to attempt to create some kind of structure around what is acceptable use. In the meantime, the best advice I can give you is that if you want to use AI for any of your research, just clear it through your professor. And I do mean your individual professor. So even within a certain department, different professors may have different allowances. So just please make sure that you are clearing it with them to make sure that you are meeting their standards. And finally, when we talk about tools, we do have videos, a ton of videos. I have a grad assistant, and this is his thing. He does such a good job with them. Basically, I will give him a task of teach students how to get from point A to point B and do it in 3 minutes or less, and he whips it out. So we do have on our YouTube channel a lot of tutorials, and they are very short, and they are designed just to quickly help you understand how to do a task. It's also where, again, we house all of our workshops, such as today's. All right, talking about Primo. I know a lot of you are learning how to use this tool really, really well. So this is a very fast refresher. This is just a screenshot of a Primo search, and I mainly just want you to see the little yellow circles, and we're just going to talk about them real quick. This is that newspaper search I had mentioned earlier. Whenever we do a search in Primo, it's going to search everywhere but newspapers or those weekly magazines. So if you want to do the search again, click newspapers, use your same search terms, and that's going to provide you a whole new list of information, but the resources will specifically be from those newspaper articles or magazine articles that are pumping out, daily. Also want you to make sure that whenever you're using Primo, just always make sure you're logged in. When you're not logged in, you run into blocks. So it's just a habit that I recommend. Just every time you log in or every time you open up Primo, make sure you're logged in. I also want you to see all these little push pins. They're here to help you save your information so that you don't have to remember how you got to the page. The Save Search saves your search parameters, and the little pins beside each of the results saves individual records. Here's that 24/7 chat. You'll see that on Primo's page. You'll see it all over the place. We have RefWorks, so you can save a citation directly to RefWorks here. And then there are also these wonderful little arrows. Not every resource has them, but when they do, they're wonderful. Whenever you are doing a search and you find something that's super interesting to you, when you follow the arrows, that's going to take you to information that's similar in vein. The downward facing arrow is going to basically jump you to the article's bibliographic page and all the resources that they used. And then the upward facing arrows, and this is probably a little more important. The upward facing arrows are going to take you to newer information, newer articles, newer books, newer chapters that have used this article in their writing. When you are doing your research, making sure that you are keeping up with all of the newest things is going to become very, very important. When we click the Save Search, that also will give you an opportunity. Let's see if I think I got it on the next page. Yeah, when we click the Save Search, it's going to give you an opportunity to turn on the query. And what that means is it's going to give you an opportunity to let the system know that you want to be notified if anything gets published that fits within your parameter. So if something pops out in the following month, you need to know that just so that you can stay on top of that newest research.
Meredith, can I ask a quick question?
Absolutely.
Just to clarify, you said the arrows are either ascending or descending chronologically, other sources?
Kind of, sort of. The downward facing arrow, that takes you to all the resources that the author used to write their article. So it's going to be older information.
Okay.
The upward, though, is going to take you to other writers, their information or their articles that quoted this one.
Okay. Okay. Thank you for that clarification.
Of course. Okay. Y'all are troopers. I know this is a ton of information. Let's talk about organization systems. Primarily, what I want you to ask yourself is what is actually going to work for you. What we're going to talk about are notation systems, citation systems, and graphs. What I want to emphasize is that when we're talking about these systems, that it's most important to find what's going to work for you. Taking the time to consider your learning style is going to help lead you to the right system. With that, we don't always have to reinvent the wheel. Peg Boyle Single, she created a system designed to help move through large amounts of material in a very efficient and quick way. And her system uses a key that she uses uniformly across all the different information that she's trying to analyze. So for her system, she's looking for things like the main argument or hypotheses, theories, quotes, anything that she may want to use in her own writing. And then she also has a place for any extra information that might need follow-up or something that she simply has a question about. Each one of these items she's looking for has a corresponding key. And you'll see she uses asterisks and letters and question mark symbols in order to mark up her paper to make sure that she can get back to it quickly. There might be other bits of information that you want to capture in your own research. So a few examples are you might need to know a historical analysis or characteristics or objectives, definitions. I mean, there are so many different things that might be specific to your research. The point of it is to make sure that you know what you need to gather and then to create some system for yourself that's going to allow you to pinpoint that information quickly. Once we have all of that, those resources, you do need to figure out a way to organize them. Citation management tools represent another kind of organization system. RefWorks, which I very, very briefly mentioned when we were talking about the icons in Primo, it's a great filing system. That's really all it is. It's just a fancy filing system. It works really well when you have different folders that represent either your chapters or your big ideas within your dissertation or thesis. For instance, I'm going to go back to that example that I gave earlier about how to be an effective Christian leader of high schoolers with mental health diagnoses in schools that have large percentages of students who are military kids. I know that's a mouthful, but I also know that most dissertations read like that. So I'm going to want my folders to represent that. So I probably would have a separate folder for education, for Christianity, for leadership, mental health, military studies. And I probably, there's no probably, I would also have one extra folder. And it would just kind of be my dream folder. It would be that extra folder that I can tuck everything else into. As you're doing your mountains of research, you're going to come across all kinds of really interesting things that part of you is going to be like, okay, I can tuck that into my dissertation. And then the realistic part of you says, no, I can't. I really can't. I want to, but I can't at this point. It's important not to lose that information because you're researchers. Just because you graduate doesn't mean that you're done. Chances are really good that when you graduate, you're going to want to go back and read that really interesting article or book chapter. You're going to want to read it in depth without having the pressure of, I just need to get my dissertation done. So having that extra folder, that way you can legitimize the importance of that particular piece of information, keep it. When you're using RefWorks, so this is just kind of a word of caution. RefWorks it only saves what you tell it to save. So if I only save a citation, that's all I have. I don't actually have the full text. However, if I do want to save the entire text, then I have to do that. I need to download the entire text, and then I need to add it right here, this little plus button. That is where you get to upload entire hunks of information, not just a citation. When you graduate, you get to keep RefWorks. It is the only citation management system that does this at this point in time. It's one of the reasons why we like it so much and why we promote it. But again, if you have not saved the entire text, you might find yourself a little bit frustrated. You're going back in your RefWorks account and you're clicking on these citations and realize, oh man, I only have a citation. I wanted to actually read that. If you did not save the whole thing, it's not going to be there. And when you graduate, our vendors get real persnickety about who gets to have access to full text. Unfortunately, when you graduate, you lose a lot of access. So just try to keep that in mind. Take the extra step, download the entire thing and save it so that you have it. It's kind of heartbreaking whenever I talk with our alumni and tell them that their access has changed. It's just a privilege of being a student, and until we live in a world where all information is free, it's just the reality. Okie dokie. We're lastly going to talk about graphic organization. You'll likely need a location to keep track of all your lists. You know, those lists we talked about earlier, the tables that you might be creating, the authorities, just all the folks that you recognize are part of your particular discipline. You're going to be able to keep that organized so that you don't have to go hunting for it. Within Microsoft Suite, you have access to a graphic organizer. It's called Whiteboard. Whiteboard is very similar to Jamboard. If any of you have ever used that in the past, Jamboard, it went away actually this month. But Whiteboard is kind of the new improved version. But Whiteboard, it looks like a big whiteboard, and it gives you lots of opportunity to drag over sticky notes or pull in screenshots, or you can literally write on it just like you would on a regular whiteboard. And it is a wonderful, wonderful system if this matches your learning style. If you are very happy to use something digital, something online, then please, by all means, consider something like Whiteboard. And it's free. That's usually a plus. But if you recognize that you don't learn this way, I, for one, don't. And this is kind of confession time here. I do not work well with everything being online. I don't enjoy reading online. I really learn better when I have something in my hands that I can manipulate, that I can scribble on, that I can move around. And if that kind of learning style matches you better, then I would definitely encourage you to literally go find a wall in your home that you can claim as your own. You just tell your family it's off limits for right now. You know, I need to be able to have a space to think and to work, and literally sticky note it to death. Do whatever you need to do in order to make that space work for you. The point of all of this is that you organizing your information is necessary. You're going to have to organize it by way of graphs. You're going to have to organize it by way of citation management systems. You're going to have these organization systems, but you also need to make sure that they are working for you. It would be a mistake to try to force something that just doesn't match you. But the bigger mistake would be to have nothing at all. I have worked with many a student who has come to me in a full-on panic because they lost their entire citation sheet. I think you can only imagine how hard it might be to find, 100 different citations based on, a 2-word quote. So definitely recognize that in order not to drown in this information or to not go into a panic of trying to keep things straight, creating an organization system is going to be necessary. I'm going to go back to that picture that we started with. We're going to review. What do I need in order to discover the boundaries of my research? And this particular page is kind of for you. I would encourage you to take some time just to think about what we've discussed in today's workshop and kind of fill in these blanks. I mean, literally or figuratively, it doesn't really matter. But the idea is just to help you to visually see what are the areas that I might need to work on just a little bit more. You can ask yourself, can I effectively use the research tools available to me? Do I need to improve in my use? Do I need to learn how to implement them? Do I need to possibly ask somebody about how to use them better? Again, I'm available. And then also definitely taking that time to say what's going to work for me. Is something like singles system of notation, is that going to be a good idea? Do I need to create my own homegrown version? Do I like the idea of RefWorks? Do I have an idea of how I want to physically or electronically graph my information? So when we started this workshop, we had this picture of this field. We started by visualizing it within, recognizing that all the information we have, all the things we're passionate about, I mean, the sky is literally the limit. But then I also asked you to begin to think about adding fences that ultimately will contain just those portions of ideas. Everything that is held within the fences is going to represent your dissertation or your thesis. And by learning about and applying some structure in the form of these boundary lines, I'm really, really hoping that you're going to recognize yourself in this picture more. That you're going to recognize that you have wonderful ideas. You cannot possibly tackle everything at once, but you can certainly work on a small portion at a time. And your dissertation or thesis is really represented more in this concept of a small garden space within the giant field of your imagination. Okay, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. And again, I know this was a ton of information, kind of representative of your dissertation process, right? So I'd like to open up for questions. You can just unmute yourself.
I
think
question.
Miss Walker's got one. She's had her hand up for a while.
Well, please unmute yourself and go ahead and ask your question.
For those of us who are more the manual system learner, visual learners, and so forth, what tips do you have? Naturally, there are so many books, there are so many articles, there are so many graphs and visuals. What tips do you have other than the wall for trying? I feel like I have stuff everywhere
Yeah.
because I only have so much space. My office is doubles as a guest room. And naturally, when guests come, I'm rearranging everything. Um, any other tip that you have for those type of learners, researchers?
Yeah. Yeah. One, I would say, if you can ask your guests just to put up with your stuff, where you don't actually have to move it. That would be the first bit of advice. I mean, really claiming a space for the duration is really important. You don't need to create for yourself a stumbling block of constantly having to reorganize yourself.
Yes. I will tell my husband, you said I need a library room.
Yeah, you do.
I have books here. I have books in my family room. I have books in my dining room. I have books in my basement. And I'm constantly, part of the challenge, I feel like, is I try to keep the primary resources close at hand, but I'm constantly trying to look for sources. And
And that
it's a
probably wears you
huge,
out.
yeah, it's a huge
Yeah.
hindrance. It's a way,
Yeah.
it's time and just efficiency. And I'm naturally kind of a very organized person, but I'm still finding a struggle with that. And I keep telling my husband, I'm like, I need a library room that has all my stuff in it. So I'm going to tell him that you said that that was needed.
Well, all joking aside, when you are building a dissertation, you are creating a library, quite literally. And it's really not a realistic thought to think that you can keep it all organized if you're having to constantly go from one room to another room to another room to keep your information. Yeah, the hope in this workshop is to let you all know that this particular stage of the process, it is messy. You know, but everything that you can do in order to create a little bit of structure to keep yourself, again, from drowning, it's worth the effort to do so.
Are there also systems for backing up the information? Like I have built some websites and there are systems that can back up the website in the event that something happens so that you can go back to that last backup rather than losing the information. Are there, I guess, systems in some of like RefWorks and so forth where you can back up your information? So unfortunately, I have had computers that have locked up on me and crashed, and I've lost so much research from undergraduate studies. And so I'm very leery of that. And I was just curious if some of those systems offer those backups.
They all offer some sort of download option. So let's say you've got 200 different citations in there and you want to make sure that you really, really are not ever going to lose them. Periodically, you could just download that list and keep that on hand. Theoretically, they shouldn't disappear. Theoretically, they should be backed up. But I do understand the being a little wary of that. All right. So I do see a couple of hands raised. Unfortunately, my screen doesn't show everybody at the same time, but I'm going to try to honor a hand that I see raised. Anton, I think your hand has been raised for a while.
Yeah, that's fine. I'm about 9 months in the process. I wish I would have had this course then, but thank you so much for that. I'm kind of being a little older than most students. I did a lot of things manual. I downloaded a lot of stuff. I printed a lot of stuff. I bought, from the very beginning, I bought a very good printer, so I printed a lot of stuff off. But then I found out I had too much information. So what I have distilled everything down. I've turned in my first and second chapter. They said no. And so I started again. And so what I've done is that I've collated all my quotes, all my references into about 66 single spaces by topic. I finally had to put everything by topic, just like those those boundaries that you said. So I had to put my topic there. They wanted more narratives. I just gave statistics. They said, put some human face on that. So that was valuable. But what I found is by distilling in one place, like right now I've got a black screen of death. I may lose what I have, but I've got it downloaded. So I've got 66 pages. And for my program, I've got to have about 125. So I broke down my 5 chapters and then realized about 25 pages each. And so what I found there is I had to finally put it into categories and the people together, because I got the books and the magazines and the articles and all those things there. So that's how far I'm into it. But they said you didn't do enough information. So now, like I said, I've got it organized in that, and that's where I'm going to go from there. But I've also got it copied right here, guarding it with my life, And, but see that, that helped, to me. I had to kind of come to that, but it took me 9 months to get to this place, and a lot of trial and error. But I got a lot of books. I got some stuff interlibrary loan, and then I said, okay, I'll purchase that one because it's so good. Because I like to mark things up. I mark them. I put notes, but then if I realized I had to collate all those sources onto one document, so then that would be my starting place. And then they said, you have opinions. You're a doctoral student. Opine. It's like, okay, cool. I get that. So anyway, but thank you for this. This has been very helpful, and I would recommend anybody that Miss Ader is helpful for the one-on-one too to get to this place. So, but I really, really appreciate this. But that's where I had to finally go to get where I can, get this done better and get
Yeah.
approved at the time, hopefully.
Well, thank you for sharing all that, and thank you for mentioning working with me one-on-one. I really can't stress that enough. I feel like the lion's share of work is usually done in a one-on-one space. It's a great opportunity to work through some of the hiccups that you might have along the way, or if you're just kind of running into a wall. Sometimes it's just really helpful to have somebody that can help you get to the research that you want, but maybe more importantly, help you to articulate what that research is. I very much enjoy those one-on-one sessions. I did throw in the chat my email address. I saw somebody had mentioned wanting to see that screen again. So instead of going back to the presentation, I just threw in my email into the chat. Let me know if that's not enough. Anne. Oh, you're muted. And you're still muted.
Go. All right, there we
There
go.
we go.
Sorry. Different program. Let me see it, Zoom. Okay, so one of the things I wanted to offer to visual learners and manual learners, I suffer from a traumatic brain injury. So for me, like having things visual and having things labeled really is so vital for me in order to remember. And so for example, like on my cabinets in my kitchen, I might have a label on the outside that says dishes. I know that seems so mundane, but for me with a brain injury, I can't always remember so much data. And when I'm trying to remember the important data for what I'm doing for research, like I don't want my brain to have to do all that extra work for the cabinets. So what I've done is I've set up what I call a command station. And so within the command station, I have like an in and out box of what's coming in and what's going out. And then I have like folders that I've set up that's like, okay, this is what I'm doing for, my education for business things, any kind of little slip of paper, anything inspiration, boom, it goes in the business folder or the entrepreneur folder. And then this is specifically on coaching, and then I throw it in that folder. And then I'm taking those physical things that have come into my environment, and then I'm putting them and blocking them on my calendar. And I'm going, did I add this into my research? Did I, and then I'm putting in my calendar on hand manually. Then I'm making a digital note in my iPhone, and I'm putting a sound on it saying, okay, remind myself that I need to do this task at this time. So I'm blocking out my schedule for what I need to do with my assignments. But I'm linking it to a physical place, which I call a command station. And then I have my calendar, like the paper calendar, on an easel so that like I can visually see it easily. The other thing that really has helped me is I've used like a physical wardrobe, like a cabinet. And so like I'll close the doors when company is coming over so they don't see all my mess. But when I'm working, those doors are open and I've got, here's my coaching wheel with emotions, and here's my, narcissistic research over here, and here's my entrepreneur research over here, and there's piles everywhere, and it's inside this cabinet. But at the end of the day, I can close it and put a little rubber band around the door and nobody can see what's going on in there. But I want to share what I had happened to me that was tragic. And that was, I had a bunch of things I was working on that day. I had them in piles all over the floor. I had a laptop on the floor that I was charging up, and I had a flood, and everything 18 inches from the floor up was destroyed. Okay. And so that means that all the research, all the papers, all the things that I had done, and I didn't get it from paper to digital. So I lost all that time. Okay. And it was extremely frustrating. And then to have other people come into your home and rip out your floors and cut out the walls and everything else. And so it's been a process, and I've been living in a hotel since August. So then not being in your own space where you've been feeding everything and then you're in a foreign place has been very challenging for me to adapt to. And so I am now like sitting in my space right now. Like this is the first week of being back in my space. So what I'm getting at is that sometimes we're put through these challenges not only to be humbled, right? That God's humbling us for what we have, and we have so much, right? The graces that we've been given, but then also that to then break it down and communicate to other people that might be struggling with this, and to also be proactive to show people, hey, don't do this so that you don't lose this, you know? So I hope that helps. Keep your stuff on tabletops. Don't put them on the floor.
Thank you. Well, it is 1:04. I definitely want to be mindful of the time. I know it's a lot to give an hour when you are busy with the rest of your life. So I am going to stop the recording. I'm going to close us in prayer, and then I'm going to hang out so that if anybody has any extra questions, we can go ahead and address them now. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording.